look at the encyclopedic sort of meaning of secession, secession is the act of withdrawing territory from a state and converting it into an independent state, or joining it to another state. So if we take the first part of the definition, meaning withdrawing territory from an existing one and converting it into an independent state, we can have the examples of former Yugoslavia, Slovenia, Croatia were some of the states which seceded from the former Yugoslavia. Some of you might also know, if we look at the second definition of secessionist act, which means linking it or joining it with another state, the historical enosis movement by the Greek Cypriots to join the whole island with Greece could also be seen as a secessionist act on the second definition. But let me tell you that secession is a negative term, one that is usually used by opponents rather than the supporters of secession. Usually, a lot of people who are exercising the secessionist act, they don't call it secession, but they usually call it freedom movement or movements of independence, things of that sort. But when it comes to the term itself is a negative one, or could be perceived negatively. Just to give you another example, if you look at United Nations Security Council Resolution 541, dated 18th of November 1983, meaning 3 days after the independence of the TRNC, that act was described by the UN Security Council as a secessionist act, and it was regarded as invalid by the Security Council and called for its withdrawal. Historically, one can show, for example, the rebellion of 13 American colonies against Great Britain as one of the earliest cases of secession. In 1860 and 1861, 11 southern states in America at that time declared secession from United States, but then they joined together to form what we know in the history as the Confederate States. But as you know, in 1865, they were defeated by the Union armies in the American Civil War. Now, in order to set the ground for analyzing secessionist acts, I think that we need to also include concepts of self-determination and the emergence of nation-states, so that we can have a theoretical background where we can analyze secessionist acts much better. Hence, for the purpose of the analysis today, I take the French Revolution, 1789, as my sort of starting position. The rise of the nation state with the French Revolution has been quite important, of course. Very funny, when I started preparing for this speech, I remembered that back in 2002, I wrote an article entitled Emergence of Nation States and Problematic Political Concepts in 4 Waves, from the French Revolution to the end of the Cold War, where I actually analyzed how new states were formed, and I analyzed them in 4 different historical phases. One starting from one group starting with the French Revolution until World War I call it first wave. Then the second wave was basically the interwar years, that is between World War I and World War II. The third wave, I call it the Cold War phase, and finally the fourth wave being the end of the Cold War. And one of my arguments there was that although self-determination does have a sound legal basis, or a sound legal basis on self-determination has already been formed, but nonetheless the exercise, the application of self-determination, in my argument, has mostly been victim to power calculations and balance of power considerations. If you take the first wave, the French Revolution to the rise of the nation state, it has a huge impact throughout the globe. And we have seen states since Westphalia, which I'm going to come back to that again, became the dominant actor in world politics, but with the French Revolution, the concept of nation state became the dominant actor in world politics. So I think that individual liberties were in a way became secondary compared to the sovereignty of the state, which we can discuss later. Taking the second wave, meaning right after World War I, we have seen emergence of 26 independent states. And basically, the consideration there was, what's going to happen to the former multi-ethnic, multinational empires who were in descent, who were just about to collapse after World War I. And specifically, I'm talking about the Austro-Hungarian Empire as well as the Ottoman empires. There, I think that we should also indicate the famous 14 points of Woodrow Wilson, where the discussion there was, when these multi-ethnic, multinational empires collapse, what's going to happen to the peoples inside, or peoples here, by and large meaning nations, a group of people who identify themselves as having a similar identity. What's going to happen to these people? And there came the concept of self-determination, which basically means the right of a people to decide its own destiny. But mostly, in this period, the considerations or the power calculations of the victorious powers of World War I dominated as to who should be given the right to exercise self-determination. So it was applied to a group of people, but was it applied to all the peoples, all the different peoples in the world? That's not the case. We have to wait for the other waves, other power shifts or power calculations so that it was applied to other people. For example, the third wave, which is during the Cold War, by and large, what we have seen during the Cold War was mostly decolonization movements when the British and the other colonial powers, who were basically losing their superpower status and becoming weaker, they had to give the right of self-determination to their former colonies, right? But as you know, at the same time, Soviet Union was a multi-ethnic, multinational sort of empire, but yet the self-determination was not exercised by those people. We have to wait until the end of the Cold War, which is the fourth wave, as I call it, when the Soviet Union declined in power, so that more than a dozen states, more than a dozen republics seceded from Soviet Union. First starting with the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and then more than a dozen of states like Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, whatever, seceded from the Soviet Union. Let's rewind a little bit. Today, I think the international system, as we call it, is by and large the product of the Peace of Westphalia, 1648. I don't know if you touched upon this in your classes, but after the 30 Years' War in Europe, there was a peace treaty called the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, and that was regarded as the beginning of the first modern international system. Now, according to Westphalian system, the state, and of course at that time when we say state, it was by and large the kingdom. Kingdoms became the dominant actor in world politics. And with Westphalia, we have seen the emergence of two very important concepts, or one concept in two dimensions. One is internal sovereignty, where the king was the sole sovereign of the state, to the extent that his competences cannot be challenged from within, meaning that he has even the competences to decide on what the religion of his subjects, I'm not even saying citizens, but his subjects are going to. So the king could even decide that whatever religion his subjects are going to take, be it Catholicism or Protestantism and whatever. And I'm using the word subject deliberately, not calling it citizen, because when we say citizen, you know this much better than I do. Citizenship implies some sort of responsibility of the state to its citizens, to the people living in that territory. But when we call a subject, I think in Turkish teba, even the subjects belong to the king. So there was the emergence of internal sovereignty there, but there is also the second dimension, which is the external sovereignty, which means that if you are a sovereign state, then no other state has the right to interfere in your domestic affairs. This is the principle of non-intervention, which later entered into the UN Charter too. So that's sort of the Westphalian system. So the territorial state became the dominant actor in world politics with Westphalia, and with the French Revolution, territorial nation state became the dominant or the most important actor in modern international system. As time progressed, individual and group rights started to gain some ground, both in international law and in the practice of world politics. For example, the first generation or the second generation and the third generation rights, especially in the 1970s, were the time that they kind of mushroomed. What I'm talking about here is the first generation rights, like civil and political rights, such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of association, or the second generation rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, social security, right to social security, right to education, right to paid leave, that kind of thing. And the third generation rights, solidarity and people's rights, such as right to self-determination, right to environmental protection, right to development. With the emergence of such rights, I think that the concept of self-determination also started changing. If you look at the original, let's say, meaning of self-determination that came out after World War I with the Woodrow Wilson points, I think that self-determination was equated to automatic right to statehood, meaning that if you are a distinct people, if you are a nation, then you have the right to establish your own independent state. But in the 70s, I think that's something very important took place where the definition of self-determination, I'm not saying changed, but another definition was attached to it. And the new definition is, self-determination was, the right of a group to participate into the democratic governance within the existing state. So if you are a multi-ethnic, multinational community, and that as a distinct group, you have the right and you have the opportunity to participate into the democratic governance within the existing state, that means also self-determination, exercise of self-determination. I think one of the example that I can also cite here was the 2004 referendums, or the twin referendums in Cyprus, where it is also known as the referendums of the Annan Plan, where the two communities, by exercising their free and uninhibited right, they participated into the referendum, not to create a separate state, but to become partners, but to participate into the democratic governance of what we call UCR, United Cyprus Republic, which was the name in the Annan Plan. So, one of the very important related debate that we have today, although on the one hand, as I told you, we still live in a world system which is predominantly based on the Westphalian system, where, especially after the French Revolution, the nation state became the most important actor, especially nation state in the form of unitary state became the most dominant actor. Nonetheless, the question is, what are we going to do in multi-ethnic societies? What are we going to do in multi-ethnic, multi-religious geographies? Now, if we are to impose the dominant paradigm, which is giving the right to every single group who claims that I am a distinct people, I am a distinct nation, then we are going to end up having probably more than 500 small or micro nation states in the world, especially a lot of micro nation states who are going to be not going to be self-sufficient themselves. Imagine what the management of the international system is going to be in such a case, where you have, instead of 190-something states that we have today. Remember, there was a vote in the General Assembly yesterday regarding Jerusalem, and 193 countries voted, right? Imagine that instead of 193, you end up having 500 or 1,000 so-called nation states. So today, still a very important debate that we have in world politics is, what are we going to do? How are we going to exercise this right of self-determination, especially in multi-ethnic, multi-religious societies? To give some examples to secessionist movements, let's take Kurds, for example. Now, Kurds are living mostly in the Middle East. Okay, there is a substantive number of Kurds in Turkey, there is a substantive number of Kurds in Iraq, there is a substantive number of Kurds in Syria, there is a substantive number of Kurds in Iran. And as you know, it was a few months ago that there was this referendum in northern Iraq, in the autonomous Kurdish region, and predominantly they supported the independence of what they call Kurdistan. What was the reaction of the international community? Well, as you see, they did not really get a lot of sympathy. Why is that? Some people are saying that it was not the best timing. But at the same time, if it starts from northern Iraq, what's going to happen to the Kurds in Turkey? What's going to happen to the Kurds in Syria? What's going to happen to the Kurds in Iran? All right? Now, in the federal constitutional Iraq, at least on paper, it is clearly written that Kurds are constitutionally sharing power with the other groups, with the Shiites and with the Sunnis. So at least on paper, they were exercising their right of self-determination, not in the original sense, meaning automatic right to statehood, but the right to participate into the democratic governance within the existing state. Well, you might ask, is there a democratic governance in Iraq? Now, that's questionable. But were the Kurds in practice in Iraq, were they obstructed? This is also very important. Were they obstructed from using their right to participate into the governance of Iraq? That's also iffy. There might be some problems, but there is no 100% clean case that, yes, this group is totally obstructed from exercising their right in the existing state. Because I argue, and many others argue the same thing, that if a group within a multi-ethnic society is obstructed by the dominant group from participating into the democratic governance, then in such a case, exercising self-determination in the original sense, meaning right to have your own independent state, becomes more legitimate. But if you already have the right and the opportunity to participate into the democratic governance within the existing state, then that aspiration or that demand to become an independent state becomes less legitimate. I think that the Catalans are a prime example because within Spain, they do exercise substantive participation. They are pretty autonomous and they are not at all obstructed to participate into the democratic governance. That's why the Catalan referendum was very much rejected or not seen very popular by the EU as well as other international actors. Yet we have other cases. I'm just giving you without a purposeful list here, but Chechens, for example, in Russian Federation, Abkhazians and South Ossetians in Georgia, Nagorno-Karabakh, Palestinians, the TRNC, Kosovo. Kosovo is an interesting case. When I was in Kosovo, everybody was using the word sui generis, nevišas nominas, as you know. Sui generis, that it cannot be seen as an example to the other cases, but I think last time I checked, Kosovo is recognized by 120-something countries. The EU is 28 members, and 23 of them recognize Kosovo. So where would you place Kosovo in this arithmetic? And of course, we have the latest sort of other secessionist cases like the Donbass and Luhansk areas in Ukraine, which are supported by Russian Federation, and Crimea, which was annexed with a referendum supposedly fitting into the second definition of secessionism by Russia. Now, this looks like, pardon my French, but this looks like a mess, because do we have now clear-cut formula, a clear-cut set of principles, a clear-cut set of criteria that we can apply to these people? Maybe as lawyers, you might come up with some, at least on paper, some clear-cut criteria, but in realpolitik, let me put it that way, this is not how it is exercised in world politics. And a lot of these cases, the exercise of the right of self-determination pretty much depends on the kind of power considerations and the power sort of, I'm trying to find the right word, the right constellation of the powers in world politics could be beneficial to a certain group of people, but it cannot be beneficial to other sort of people. And especially now, we are living in a world where principles and international law, maybe I shouldn't be commenting on this in front of all these lawyers, but the principles and international law became so weak nowadays. Just take the last act that the United States have on the decision on Jerusalem, the decision to transfer its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. By the way, I was in Jerusalem up until 2 days ago, and I've seen it with my own eyes there. I think that this is a huge mess which is undermining those very principles and agreed upon pieces of international law. As you know, 1947, there was the UN partition plan for Palestine and Israel, that the UN decided that there will be 2 states where Jerusalem would be shared by these two, and it was agreed upon, and it became almost like part of international law, correct me if I'm wrong, that East Jerusalem will be the capital of Palestine, the state of Palestine, and West Jerusalem will be the capital of Israel, the state of Israel. Look at what Trump was saying 2 nights ago, or just 1 night ago. He was saying, let all the states, 190 of them, whatever they decide, it's not going to make any influence on us. If you look at the American ambassador, her speech at the General Assembly yesterday, it was one of the disasters, I think, of the recent times. In a way, threatening all the member states, saying that there will be consequences of your action. And those very actions that many of the, at least 128 of them supported this motion. It is, in a way, in my opinion, putting a torpedo under the very fundamental principles and international law that the United States himself was a leader in creating after the end of World War II in establishment of the new international liberal order, or whatever you call it. So today we are living, unfortunately, in a very difficult time when these principles and international law is not its best time to be upheld by many states. And this has also very grave consequences on on the exercise of self-determination, and has lots of implications for future secessionists.